to be here. This is my second time at Brookdale, and I feel really humbled and very, very honored again to read with a group of amazing poets and friends, Suzanne and Laura and Michael and Colleen, and thank you everybody for coming out. I know it's the end of the semester. And I also hope that you know you have an incredible, incredible community here. I teach at Monmouth, and they have a pretty good community there too, but you are very lucky here. So. And I'm gonna start with an initiation poem. We were talking about this earlier. I don't have too many happy poems, so this is one of the few happy dark poems. And I was born and lived in Romania for the most part of the my first 24 years, that was communist Romania. And at the time, Romania was a totalitarian regime. I used to try and get away from the drudgeries of life. I used to spend summers in nun or monk monasteries with two of my closest friends. And we had to stay with the nuns, but what I really wanted to do is flirt with the monks and try to corrupt them. And so this poem is, to a certain extent, sort of a coming of age about sexual awakening. But in retrospect, I think the experience was, I would like to think that the experience was also political and really subversive. Because the monks and the monasteries were these places that seemed on the surface untouched by history, by the endemic corruption, by the fear and deprivation that we all lived in. And I love the transgressive monks with the long beards and dresses, the habits. So, self-portrait of monk. A bearded bride in black chiffon, lay of garlic dandling his neck like the pearl ballroom choker of God. He prances across the cobbled path, pushing a wheelbarrow stacked with freshly scissored lovage and marigold. I've been spying all morning from the terrace suspended mid-wall, and when, halfway across the courtyard, my monk lifts his head, I abandon echoes the name of the rose and bend over the rail to flip a ladybug, sure he'll notice my silky mane. He doesn't, so I trail through the oak door into the dining hall to watch him arrange sunheads and mauve field tulips in clay pots. I have already retraced the salty route of his fingers on the spines of pickled grape leaves, in ground lamb hand-rolled, in herbs sun-dried. He cooks and feeds and scrubs, but never eats, my monk, spends lunch elbow deep in suds or scratching the bellies of cats. No wonder he's so famished by the time Cassiopeia arrives. Then black chiffon and ivory flesh stream upward, shape-shifting in flight. Raven, whiskered bat, pricolici, vârcolaci. At dawn, he lands between two rose bushes, soot in his mouth, weeping who knows why, my celestial monk, torn cassock, glistening with spent saliva, rapture in upturned eyes. And a love poem for my husband, Michael. And one of the beats in the poem is the capitalized B-A-T-S, so beats from Michael. They become sweeter with age, bolder too, surprisingly firm when I broil them whole in early winter, the reds carnal as always, but less likely to bleed at the slightest incision. When I release the tinfoil, the beet's hot tongue pries open my mouth. I take it all, laced, earth smoke, vapors rising straight from heart rot. When I transferred the steamy root to your plate and offered to slather it with butter, honey, goat cheese, you decline, the very sight of them unpalatable. I defend the loneliness of its sagging folds, pure heartthrob. I try Aphrodite, the beetroot goddess, her lava lips. I try the oracle at Delphi, who claimed beads worth in silver. Try bead powdered warriors, god Kvasir's meat of inspiration. Rasputin's protege, you could see it in his eyes. Then, at a loss, I riff poorly on the beads. With fingertips and knife, you peel off its singed slip and carve the hard flesh into robust chunks. Eat, eat. Don't mind me. I love seeing you eat. You feed me your own whiskered heart, then mine, stained fingers, one with a beat. And my mother has been coming to the United States for the last, 15 years or so, on and off, sometimes for good chunks of time, 6-7 months. And she works, she cleans, generally she takes care of elderly or children, but sometimes she cleans houses. So a few years ago, she called me and she was working in this upscale Manhattan apartment, and so she called. She said, "Well, I'm cleaning, this apartment, and I find this couple. They don't have any kids, but I'm finding all these toys everywhere, and so under the mattress and under the bed and in the different drawers, and they're weird. You push a button and they make all these funny noises, and some of them have little wings and I realized she was talking about a vibrator, and so I tried to explain, and she's like, but they're married. But what do you mean? And I thought, well, okay, this is not the kind of conversation I want to have with my 60-some-year-old mother on the phone. She explained for the first time what a vibrator was. So I said, okay, we'll talk about it when I see you. So, but that's the eager beaver in the poem. Alien resident. My mother rescues bitter cherries off Queens Boulevard. She catches and hoists them in the net of her pleated skirt, cradles them to her employer's kitchenette. On a leather bar stool that spins into night, she pits and pits, keeps pace with the vermicular fanfare, bitter blood on the nails, petite castanets cackling in the dry mouth. On the trenches of dawn, crushed flesh dissolves in the sugar bath as she nods on one elbow to the squills of bedroom doors. She spoons coffee, keeping count aloud, and pours milk for kids' pancakes as instructed with a measuring cup. The perfect scale of her eyes she wastes on homespun sanitizers, 2/3 vinegar, 1/3 peroxide for sinks, counters, her eager beaver, his dumbbells. She jogs through the day in bark slippers, elm embossed with perfectly knifed hearts. What's she doing here, my mother, in a toddler cot? Apron pockets lined with shriveled fruit worms, jars of preserve ticking under the mattress like hand grenades. And I'm gonna read a section from a long poem, a longer sequence that Suzanne mentioned and that I mentioned earlier at that dinner. And it's called Radioactive Wolves, a retelling, and a number of the sections in this poem are inspired by, and some of them use direct language, and some of the stories from Svetlana Alexievich's Voices from Chernobyl, an oral history of a nuclear disaster. And I want to read some sections because we're commemorating 30 years from the Chernobyl disaster in Pripyat, Ukraine. According to a 2016 Greenpeace study, the accident remains the most severe, the one whose irreversible damages to the environment and to us we're gonna see over time. Some people consider the zone, the area approximately 18 miles around the reactor, uninhabitable for at least 20-30,000 years. So a number of people have returned, a number of people refused to evacuate, to leave. About 600,000 people were relocated, but a number of people refused to leave, remained in the zone, and in the last few years, others have returned. So I'm going to read just some segments. Chernobyl Zone, 1986. Do not believe me. I was not there. I was pulping rotten quinces. I did not know, just as those who were there did not know. It was a sacred lie, the lightning rod, the radioactive shock forgotten before it happened. Moscow Hospital, May 1986. Sit. No touching in here. My husband buckles against the iron frame. Someone comes in to measure the heat. Because he clocked in 3 minutes too soon, because we fooled till dawn, then stayed awake to let each other's souls dry and dress us for the day. There are sicknesses that can't be cured. You have to sit and watch them. This one blooms like black petunia in a commercial garden. Mouth-sized tares swell to fullness without a hint of sun. In his mouth, on cheeks, tongue, they bloom. Black petunias, black to smell, black to touch. At night, petals hover below the bulb like miniature kites, speckled with blood. They are of flesh, these flowers that channel poison away from the heart. I cool him off with a bouquet of parsley dipped in moonshine. For a night, you can tell the angels have been choking on celestial gas. Chernobylnik means mugwort. Chernobyl, the house of mugwort. Once or twice, pinnately lobed, lanceted, gloss doubled by a cottony down, it shadows stream banks and country ditches, dishevels front steps. In one dream, my right foot misses it. The fossilized berry explodes seconds before my soul means to crush it. At one time, pilgrims rubbed sandals with mugwort oil to make the journey light. Held the weed in esteem, it added a kick to beer, warded off the mischief of mushrooms. Mixed with honey, it takes away blackness off the falls. Rolled into pellets, ignited directly on the skin, it flames uncontainable. Its seed was said to cure quotidians, soothe hysterics, de-obstruct the spleen. Boiled in lard, it quelled swellings of tonsils and quinsy. Here now, in mugwort land, it has lost all powers but the abortive. Women wait till roots are dry and brittle, snapping when bent. One after another, they let themselves let go, for there's no way to tell if what they carry resembles a human. Exclusion zone. The soldiers who've measured the whole nod. She milks her cow, pours the milk onto the ground in the front yard. She wipes each worm egg, places it in the wicker basket, buries the basket in the hole, tall as a standing man. Good woman, hummed the soldiers with eyes the color of moonshine. Good woman. My neighbor gifted all her chickens, watched us twist their soft necks. My mouth kept track of each new knot, left eyes drift toward the year dissolution of lips. Blood dripped into the milk pail. When doctors and nurses stopped touching, I fed his tube vodka. What did I care for what I couldn't understand? The only time I don't cry is at night. You can cry about the dead at night. Tell everyone about my daughter. Write it down. At 4, she sings, dances, knows poetry by heart. She puts her dolls on IV. She was born a little sack. Complex aplasia in medical terms. Suit of armor, doctor's translation for us. Right. Every half hour, we squeeze out her urine manually through an artificial opening. Maybe that's enough. I know you're curious. People who weren't there are always curious. And I'm going to end with a poem titled Memoir. And this memoir is a sort of a compressed version of my life under communism. Romania had probably the most repressive and oppressive regime in Eastern Europe. And the poem addresses also one of those pivotal, haunting moments in my pre-American history, a moment that I return to again and again. And I have a poem about this in the first collection, and this is a second poem in the second collection. And it somehow functions as a marker. Memoir. The epigraph. Romanian dictators Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu were executed on December 25th, 1989, after 25 years of ruthless rule. The story of a people is the story of their denials. If I bulleted that story now, you wouldn't know how to wipe the sweat off your palms. Your poor palms afraid to set down the remote. You must have seen at least once the news clip of the 2 dictators who denied till bullets mute them the genocide against their own people, and must have seen more than once the PBS special on infamous words festering, cribs stacked with cords of bones rigged with spectral smiles. Who would have guessed that the orchestrators of terror would end up in a makeshift barrack, their shriveled torsos so infuriatingly small and rigid as dolls, but for arms flapping hysterically? 12 million of us for 25 years. They watched us crawl in unison toward the palm that held 2 crumbs. One for the informer, one for the informed on. You may have understood the story of the firing squad, how, fearing clones, we measured and re-measured the corpses, shot and re-shot them. We each craved a bit of dried blood, a frayed cuticle, an eyebrow stump, a finger on the trigger. So we replayed the execution all through Christmas, kissed our informers, broke bread with strangers, stopped stoning strays, begged gypsies for forgiveness. We loved as only people who cannot get enough of death love. We loved unconditionally for one long day, that Christmas of 1989. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming out tonight to hear some poems. So much beauty in the world, trills Macy Gray, and the studio crew claps rhythmically into the mic, as though the response to beauty should be applause. And in fact, it was each summer evening in the 80s at the outdoor cafe on the cliff on Eos, where the rousing final movement of Dvorak was synced to the sun's declension, so that the orchestra crescendoed, then abruptly ceased at the precise moment the amaranthine disk of sun dissolved into the Aegean, all of us burnt and stoned and giddy as we burst into applause before nimbling the goat paths to hostels where we showered in anticipation of the modest debaucheries of night. But it's the applause that stays with me rather than the ravers on holiday in their sheer linens and seamless tans, the applause and the beauty that provoked it, the sunset so elemental in that sparse landscape, the inexhaustible swiving of sun and sea, the hissing we thought we heard below the cellos and violas and timpani, less the devil's beckoning tongue than the sizzle of skin, perversely pleasurable, more than enough sacrifice for our sins as we stared all day at each other's bodies, then entered them each night, that sibilant psss, louder as flesh touched flesh in imitation of sun and sea, in homage to sun and sea, to so much beauty in the world. Oh, Macy Gray, I'm clapping along right now, stopped at the traffic light, years and miles away from the island, which still blazes in beauty without me. Even at this hour, when all the young fuckers who have followed my hoofprints sigh in their sleep, and the sun slips out of the sea with no one watching, not one lost a sylph searching for her sandal, or ghost of shepherd, or farmer on donkey, to begin this day with the joyful prayer of applause. I'm going to stay on this island of Eos for a couple of poems. It's a Greek island in the Cyclades, and I lived there off and on during the 1980s, sometimes for as long as 5 months. This is Last Day on Eos. Blunt nubbins birthed on dainties whiffled into your drawer. The mice pulsated pinkly, transparent. 6 erasers lacking graphite to lend them purpose. So I swaddled them in the silk sling of one thong, black eye beads absorbing the wince-sharp blast of sky, out of which wings gyred as I fluttered the tribe unto stubble. 6 micey nuggets, 6 snouty baubles, babes whisked by beaks to raucous treetop nurseries. For how many hours did my shadow needle our garden, startled by the first knowledge of our fate, to be driven naked and ashamed, imparadised beyond the unlatched gate. So back in the mid-'80s, my parents were coming over to visit, and I wanted to take them to some of the islands. But Eos was one of those places where a lot of European teenagers would go. It was a nude beach, and I figured my parents weren't going to be so comfortable there. And so I looked at some other islands, and I went to this island called Skiathos. And while I was there one night, this dog came out, and I gave him some food that I was eating, and he wound up staying with me then for the rest of that week. He just was with me everywhere. When I went back to my room at night, he slept outside the door. And when I opened the door in the morning to come out, he was waiting there, and he just started trotting along with me. And when I left the island, got onto the ferry, he was there, right there on the pier, then watching me pull away. And I thought, oh, what a great dog this was. Wish I could bring him home. Right? So about a month later, my parents come, and we're taking the ferry back to the island. And I said, oh, and there was this really cool dog that I like so much, and maybe we'll see him, who knows, and stuff. So we get there, and that night we're eating at a cafe, and I say, look, and here comes the dog, and he's just kind of trotting along. He looks over at me, and he looks back, and then he goes, whoa, like that. It was this great, doggy double take. And I thought, oh. And then he wound up hanging out with us for the whole rest of that week, too. So we go home, say goodbye again, and I tell my friends in Athens about this dog, and they all look at each other, and they say, oh, you know what happens to those dogs once the tourists leave? And I thought, well, no, I didn't know what happened to them, and why would I want to know about that anyway? And so I don't know if this poem makes it fully clear, but I hope so. It's called Zeus, Cyclops, Plato, Gaia. Home in winter, bored backpackers scroll through pics of dogs they fed all summer, recalling the names given them, how each skinny rag hobbled from a doorway to tug lamb sausage from outstretched fingers, then offered one ear to be stroked before following those hands to hostels where they waited all night in the courtyard, huddled with cousins, dreaming of sheep. How the dogs yipped on the wharf as the ferry slipped away before slinking back to shadowy nooks, before shepherds, once October diminished, swept through cobbled village streets to hoist, scruff by scruff, onto the beds of empty vegetable trucks, all the island dogs they could gather, then clattered the dirt road to the God-shunned cliffs, overlooking, in every thumb to photo, the unforgivably blue Aegean. So what would happen is that when they weren't being fed any longer, the dogs would form packs, and then they would go after the sheep. And so the farmers needed to get rid of them. So, and if you got through that winter, and then you snuck around again when the tourists came back. So here's another poem. This is a poem set in Mihaela's Romania. There's a hat that you see men wearing in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East and into India, in fact. And it's a kind of hat that from the side, it looks like it's kind of curly wool, and from the side it looks like a boat or a football, and from front it's kind of a triangle, and it's called a caracul. And this poem is about that hat. Caracul. In summer the storks nest on telephone poles. Their fledglings peep over the round rims of straw and sometimes spill to the blacktop below, where feral cats make quick work of their bones. The nests remain empty all winter until those storks return to the same nest once more. This winter, ISIS has been all over the news, dragging blades across journalists' throats, kindling gas-soaked soldiers in cages, flinging gay students off rooftops of mosques, hammering to rubble the ancient sites. Better to begin again with cruelty so the world might be purged of its past. Here, as in many parts of the East, every man of a certain age wears a wool caracul through winter. The best hats are sewn from the pelts of lamb fetuses slit from the womb and bought by politicians to flaunt and wave as they march in national holiday parades. Next in quality are the pelts of newborns, killed as they slip from mother to pasture. A single skin equals a single hat. It's the workmanship and the material, the wooden needle looping infinities as the bobbin spins out the fur, its incomparably soft liquid texture with subtle shadings ranging from eggshell white to northern night that set the caracul apart. But still, in the back of my mind, there endure the crinkled corpses, the mothers crying out for their offspring, and the men who continue to perfect their art. I don't know, I should read another poem or two from the new book before reading some of these new poems. You doing okay so far? Yeah? I know, I'll lighten it up with something funny. And this will be a new poem. So I love being here. I want to thank Suzanne for inviting me back. I read here first just 8 years ago. I hope 8 years from now she'll invite me back. When I first moved here in 2008, even before I arrived, I had gotten a letter inviting me to give a reading here, and then came and met Suzanne and the other remarkable poets here, Laura and Michael, and felt immediately welcomed into this community, more welcomed here, in fact, than in my home school at first. So, and I've always been terrifically grateful for that, and have a great spot for you guys, and have met so many of you who have been in the Creative Writing Club over the years too. So thank you for having me tonight. So I have a friend who asked me one time, "Where's the strangest place you've ever made love?" And I thought, "Wow, what a great question!" And then I started asking people about that too. And so I started putting their answers into a poem. Some of them might be made up. You can decide. Yeah. But most of them, if not all of them, are absolutely true. So this is called Friends Have Made Love in Strange Spaces. Ambulances, dog houses, their kids' tree houses, bell towers, clock towers, tower records, Christmas crutches, canoes, reptile houses and failing zoos, on diving boards, altars, billboard catwalks. I see I'm hitting close to home with some of you. Billboard catwalks, bocce ball courts, trampolines, on that bathtub-sized, gilt-framed Victorian mirror that once may have pleasured a brothel wall, propped in the scenic route antiques barn, till we roofed it home, let it gulp blue sky, gentled it onto the rug, Windexed it, the glass breathing light, drawing depth, then swam together on that melting glacier above the fluid couple who quickened beneath us, wavery twins flashing below the surface, who gave themselves fully flesh by flesh by flesh before breasting up to resume their labor, to heft the mirror onto our parlor wall. Look how they grin, those wild ones, those swingers. This is a little poem that came fairly quickly and came from a story a friend told me. It's called The Argument. Tonight I think of the married couple living apart in distant states who date one night each week. They dine together via Skype, laptops propped on tables, each alone in the other's company, speaking of students and empathy, tempting one another with plump olives and Chilean reds. Some nights, too tired to converse, one angles the Mac before the TV so they can view together Anderson Cooper or The Wire, season 3. And so the marriage goes, each in a state that denies their union, each licking lips and fingertips, the sea bass, the lamb, the distance between them less than the expanse between you wounded by words and me writing this roundabout apology. So I've been writing poems. I didn't realize what they were about, I guess, until I was showing them to Mihaela when they were finished, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh God, this is so sad." And I said, "Oh, I didn't realize how sad it is. I guess it is sad." And they're all poems about they're like aging, getting older, you know. And so this is one of them. It's called "Remember Body." Remember, body, how you flashed like foil, loofed and mirrored and confettied with talc, wooing the mirror while slipping the shirt from its wooden hanger to silk over the serpentine muscles of outstretched arms and oxen yoke of your shoulders, its tail yielding like the fabled farmer's daughter as you palmed it down the vise of black jeans. Now your spine curls like the hook of that hanger, and your shoulders slump like surf at ebb tide. The sleek, compact globes of your buttocks, on which your lover could bounce a quarter, sag and crimp like the jowls of a mastiff. Remember, body, your sensual crimes, summoned back now by the thumbs of masseurs. Once you were so buff, once you were all shine. And here's a little postscript to that poem. Remember, old tongue, how you loved to lie. I was never buff, and I gave off less light than a firefly. So when you're in Romania, you see these signs all over the place in big letters, and I wish I could show you, but it's I-E-S-I-R-E. I-E-S-I-R-E. And then there's an arrow pointing. And so I kept looking at this sign, thinking, what's going on with this? And this is the poem that came from it. I keep thinking the meaning of the word must be desire. So I want to follow its arrow to wherever it's pointing. That ballroom through which desire throbs like a wound, like the strings of the bass of Charles Mingus. That's the wherever where I'd like to be. At the groin's Chernobling epicenter, on longing's narrow, precarious lip, on the viscous, pearlescent tip of desire. But the meaning of the word is exit, meaning, therefore, death, that space I'd rather avoid, an absence, abyss, an abscess raw as a screech chalking a blackboard, or, louder and rippling outward, zeros, a ceaseless, starless, staticky buzz, unlike the seizure-inducing strobe I keep pretending desire is. Here's the poem from which the title Celestial Joyride comes from. It's a little poem titled Old School. Seth wrestled the Camaro with one fist and popped handfuls of pills while the pistol rode on my thigh. I shouted, "Is it loaded?" over Grandmaster Flash. Amateur thug, he slipped the piece into his boot and swaggered like a bouncer into the funeral home. Sunglassed still and jittery, he scanned the room, swept past uncles to the open coffin, knelt there, then wedged the gun between our father's thumbs, insurance for the celestial joyride, and tattooed, pierced, and fucked up, bowed his shaven skull and wept. And I'll just read two more. I'm going to read two early poems because I was thinking of the students we were speaking with tonight at dinner who were asking us questions about the creative process, how we get started, how did we ever begin, what keeps us going even, things like that. So I'll read these two early poems that are both about writing. This one is called The Mystery of the Caves. I don't remember the name of the story, but the hero, a boy, was lost, wandering a labyrinth of caverns, filling stratum by stratum with water. I was wondering what might happen. Would he float upward toward light, or would he somersault forever in an underground black river? I couldn't stop reading the book because I had to know the answer, because my mother was leaving again. The lid of the trunk thrown open, blouses torn from their hangers, the crazy shouting among rooms. The boy found it impossible to see which passage led to safety. One yellow finger of flame wavered on his last match. There was a blur of perfume. Mother breaking miniature bottles, then my father gripping her, but too tightly, by both arms. The boy wasn't able to breathe. I think he wanted me to help, but I was small, and it was late. And my mother was sobbing now, no longer cursing her life, repeating my father's name among bright islands of skirts circling the rim of the bed. I can't recall the whole story, what happened at the end. Sometimes I worry that the boy is still searching below the earth for a thin pencil of light, that I can almost hear him through great volumes of water, through centuries of stone, crying my name among blind fish, and wanting so much to come home. And this is a poem called Horse. The first horse I ever saw was hauling a wagon stacked with furniture past storefronts along Knickerbocker Avenue. He was taller than a car, blue-black with flies, and bits of green ribbon tied to his mane bounced near his caked and rheumy eyes. I had seen horses in books before, but this horse shimmered in the Brooklyn noon. I could hear his hooves strike the tar, the colossal nostrils snort back the heat, and breathe his inexorable, dung-tinged fume. Under the enormous belly, his swung like the policeman's nightstick, a dowsing rod longer than my arm. Even the Catholic girls could see it, hung there like a rubber spigot. When he let loose, the steaming street flowed with frothy, spattering urine. And when he stopped to let the junk man toss a tabletop onto the wagon bed, I worked behind his triangular head to touch the foreleg above the knee, the muscle jerking the mat of hair. Horse, I remember thinking, 4 years old and standing there, struck momentarily dumb, while the power gathered in his thigh surged like language into my thumb. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you. It's a well-considered question, but I'm not sure that I agree with that. I mean, I wish my work was selling, as you say. That would be that would be great. But I don't think those poems come out of the personal element, but that's only where they begin. You experience something, and one assumes that experience is out of my life, but it may not be. It may be made up. It may be something that I've invented. It may be something out of somebody else's life. And the idea is that that's a starting place, and I would like to think that the poems then are about your lives as well. They're about all of our lives and ways in which we're connected. So I don't mean for those poems in any way to speak only for myself. I think maybe if some of them are selfish, they wind up doing that. But that's not been the case, I like to think. In terms of what's new and what's trendy now, then, I don't know, and I sort of don't care because I'm not thinking of writing for a market. I'm not thinking about an audience when I read or who my ideal reader might be. None of that matters. It gets to a point after a while, if you're a young writer especially, I'm talking to you guys then, where you stop. You're not writing anymore for your teacher. And you're not writing for your parents or for your boyfriend or girlfriend. I mean, you're writing these poems not always even for yourself, but you're writing them for the sake of the poem and seeing what the poem requires. And it becomes an exercise in craft that means to transcend that exercise and somehow blossom into a poem. And that's what you do. And if anybody then invites me to read, as Suzanne did this evening, or takes a poem for a magazine, or whatever, gives me a grant, thank goodness, what luck, because that's not what I expected when I started writing, and it's really not even what I expect now, because I'm going to be doing this whether anybody recognizes me for it or not. And so I guess I wouldn't be thinking along those particular terms. But Mihaela may have a very different take on this.
I think that my work, or I try to be reflective, but not so much self-reflective, if it makes sense. And I think some of the poems I read, I mean, I tried really hard to find poems about myself in the collection. I was talking about this earlier at dinner. One of the epigraphs in the book is we get our voices from the voices of others, and by Colin McCann. And I do see myself very much as the product of various histories. And if anything, I have been asked again and again, before, why I don't write about personal issues, why I don't write about the interior life, about why I'm not a confessional poet, coming from that particular background where the private, the personal was very much suppressed. So there was a certain expectation that I would write out of, that I would explore the interior life that had been denied to us under communism. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in social issues. I'm interested I think of myself as a political poet, even in the most personal poems. I think I'm trying to engage with issues that I see as part of the social issues, political issues that obsess me, that haunt me. So in terms of trends, I really don't, I love all kinds of poetry, and I tell my students the most important things I've learned in terms of craft, I've learned by forcing myself to study poetry that is radically different from mine. Poetry is aesthetic I don't necessarily share or embrace, and forcing myself to articulate what I don't like about certain trends has helped me incredibly as a writer. In terms of the work I translate, the same. I pick poets whose work is very different from mine, because I want to force myself. I want to learn new strategies. I want to develop as a writer. I'm not interested in writing the same poem again and again. And if I'm unhappy with the success of a poem, if I think it's like, wow, this is a good poem, then I immediately question it. Why is it a good poem? Is it because it's the kind of poem I've been writing, and that makes me unhappy? So I'm very much interested in reading, and I appreciate work that doesn't read at all or look at all like mine. So.
And I'll just add to that very briefly and say this as an example. Then there are poems that speak directly about subject matter, and there's subject matter that needs, especially in our time now, to be addressed. And think of Black Lives Matter, for example. At the same time, poets often speak indirectly. And so someone might read my poem where I mention ISIS, and then go ahead to read another poem of mine where I talk about the dogs on a Greek island, and what happens to those dogs when the tourists are gone, when no one is looking. And might connect that, I think, to all of those Syrian immigrants who are arriving on Greek islands now, like Lesbos, and what happens to them if no one looks. And so the poems begin to connect with each other in ways that are perhaps more subtle. And hearing a poem for the first time, no reason why you might think of that, but seeing it in front of you on a page and returning to it after you've read another poem and going back, these poems begin to speak to each other, I think, as they create a body of work. And then the political underpinnings of some of this work maybe becomes more and more clear.
It's interesting because I That's why we love reviewers. I'm always surprised to see the kind of connections people who read the work or write about it, reviewers find between different poems. And very often I'm not aware of those. And I'm always grateful for, I do believe that readers could be a lot more astute and smarter than the writers of the poems or any work. So I'm always grateful for those kind of connections. But I think part of why I write is I want to spend time with confusing things. So forcing the poem forces me in a way to not necessarily to find a shape to that confusion, not necessarily to resolve it, but to live with the kind of ambiguity that is productive, that helps me figure out things. So I don't know if that answers the question, but. You've probably heard this so many times, and it's become almost a cliche, but it's true. I do write out of the need, out of the necessity to clarify, to make things, to make sense of things for myself. So, and I'm hoping that in the process, others can make sense of maybe not the same things, but going through the process of reading something could force similar kind of introspection. So.
Yeah, if I understood the question, I mean, the notion is that we write to understand our lives, not just our own lives, but the lives of others, and to develop some empathy for the lives of others too, to begin to identify with them. So it's a topic, look, if I write a poem, Adrienne Rich, if memory serves me well, has a poem about the death of her sister in a car accident then. And so someone comes up to her at a reading after she reads that poem and says, that poem meant a lot to me. I, too, had a sister who died in a car accident. Should Rich then say to her, I didn't have a sister who died in a car accident. That was really a poem about grief. And in trying to illustrate a notion of grief, I used that as an example. But then I'm glad that it touched you then. That makes sense to me. And so that notion of what's true or what's not true, what's in my life or someone else's life, that finally seems immaterial. And all of that fuss that does go on about the distinction between fiction and creative nonfiction, and people being, pulled onto television shows because they made up things in a nonfiction book, I just find that a bit ludicrous. I don't really care whether it's true or not true. I care whether it's touched me in some way and made me a little bit smarter and more empathetic, as I said. So.
Of course. You're going to say it's never first abandoned, right?
Right. That's the old.
When you abandon it, I have to abandon it for a while. Any poem. Once I think I've done everything I can for the moment, I put it aside, and I have to give it, weeks, sometimes months before I return to the poem and see what else I could do with it. And so for me, it's more of this is it. I don't know what else to do. That doesn't mean that I'm happy with the poem and that I feel it's finished. It's just at that point a matter of, is it good enough, to stand as a poem, or do I throw it away? And so it's very rare that I have that wow moment where I think there's nothing else that this poem needs. So I don't know if that, but generally I revise a lot. So when I feel I've taken the poem as far as I could, I stop. So.
Yeah, Linda, and for me, I guess when I get to a point where I feel that there's not a word in the poem that I could remove without somehow damaging the poem, there's not a word that I could replace with a stronger word, a more interesting word, a word that sounds better in its place, a word that offers more levels of meaning. If there's not a line break that I could change that would help to enhance the meaning a bit more. In other words, if there's just no other possibility for me left to make the poem better, and even though I realize all this time I could be wrong, right? I could be absolutely mistaken about this. Then I feel that I can move on finally to another poem, if that poem wants to come to me finally. But that doesn't mean that sometime later I won't see something in that poem or hear something as I'm reading that poem aloud that strikes me as off, and I'll go back to that poem then. And in that way, that process really is never ending. So.
I started writing about 10 years ago. I came to the United States to do an MA, and then I went on to do my PhD. So when I was, as I was working on my dissertation, I felt very burned and very distraught, but by what was happening to me, as a human being living in the jargon. So I started writing then. But I had never written in Romanian or Romanian. I haven't written in Romanian. That's interesting. I know for sure that I would have never written this particular poems in Romanian, not even here in America. So I'm curious about that myself. I have no idea. If I were to write in Romanian, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think I would write in Romanian. I think part of what's at the root of my need to write is the fear of not belonging. I really wanted to belong to the English language as an immigrant, and I still think of myself as an immigrant. It doesn't matter that I've been here for 20 years, and I think part of feeling at home in America has nothing to do with citizenship, it has nothing to do with status, with, and so on, and it had to do with living, being part of the language, and making the English language my own. So I think that's very much at the core of the impulse to write. So that doesn't mean that I don't love my Romanian, and I do write in Romanian in my journals, but not poetry.
Or speak with you if you have more questions. And thank you both for coming, and for all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great audience. Thank you.